This video is an overview of IMFs, not a description of the types. We're going to talk about three types. We're going to talk about dipole-dipole interactions, London dispersion forces, and hydrogen bonding. But the general idea of what an IMF is that it is an intermolecular force of attraction. And the strength of that force of attraction between the molecules, not within them, affects many physical properties. Now, think of these two water molecules. They are sticking to each other. Since they're stuck to each other, they're either in the liquid or they're in the solid phase. If you want to melt or boil them to make them go to the gas phase, you have to separate the molecules. And make sure it's clear. You're not breaking the bonds between the atoms within the molecule. You're separating the two water molecules. Well, how difficult is it to do? Well, how difficult it is to do has a direct effect, notice the word direct, on the following physical properties. It makes sense that these are physical properties because when they undergo these things like phase changes, you don't make a new substance. And you don't make a new substance when you separate molecules one from the other. You're not making hydrogen, oxygen, you're just moving the water molecules or whatever the molecules are. So the physical properties that have a direct relationship with the strength of the force of attraction are as follows. The melting point, boiling point, freezing point, condensation point, sublimation point, the temperature at which the phase change happens. That's direct. So if molecules are stickier, they'll melt at a higher temperature. So things that are solid at room temperature, and there are molecular, like butter, let's say, the intermolecular force of attraction in butter are relatively high. That is why butter is a solid at room temperature. You would have to raise the temperature to break those IMFs. We'll talk about the nature of those IMFs later. Now, along with the temperature which happens, the amount of energy required to do that process is also affected. So there's a direct relationship with the heat of fusion and the heat of vaporization. So it takes a lot more energy to boil water than it does, let's say, to cause nitrogen to boil. Why? Because nitrogen boils at a very low temperature. The IMFs are very weak, and the amount of energy required to do that process would actually be less as well. It also affects two other variables. One of them is surface tension. Even in the liquid, things can stand on top of liquids because the molecules are sticking to each other in a chain. That's why water striders can walk on the water. All right. However, you can apply a certain amount of force and then the surface breaks and whatever's on there will break through the water. So you can't like place a rock on water, but you can place a water strider on. The water strider has a certain weight applying to its 4 feet, so there's only a certain amount of force pushing down the water, and the surface tension is great enough that the water strider does not fall through. If they're stickier, the surface tension will be greater for the liquid. The fourth variable is viscosity. Viscosity is resistance to flow. So if I were to put a splotch of water on the whiteboard and a splotch of, let's say, ketchup on the whiteboard, you would expect that the water would flow down faster. Why is it flowing faster than the ketchup is? Well, the ketchup, whatever the molecules are on the ketchup, the sugar and all the other things they put in there that are bad for you, those molecules are sticking to each other more. They're stickier, essentially. So gravity is able to act more quickly, as it were, on the water molecules, and they flow faster down the board. Water has less viscosity and has weaker IMFs. Now, the one indirect one, these are all direct, right? The one indirect one is vapor pressure. Vapor pressure is the force as molecules leave the liquid phase below the boiling point. They bang into the walls of the container, and you can put mercury in a U-tube like this, and the molecules of the vapor being a gas below its boiling point, can be compared to the pressure of the air on the outside. So if the air pressure is 760 millimeters of mercury, in this particular case, since the force here and the force here are equal, the vapor pressure will be 760. Now, things that have a higher vapor pressure evaporate more readily. So, for example, in 10th grade, you had a diagram that looked like this, with temperature, and temperature down here and vapor pressure here, and it would have like 4 liquids all looking like that. Okay, it was on the regions. This one was acetone, nail polish remover. Acetone at every given temperature had the highest vapor pressure. Why did it have a high vapor pressure? Because the molecules easily evaporated. So there are more molecules, which cause more pressure, which would cause this to go down on this side, up on the other side. Right? So if something has very weak IMFs, that means the molecules are not sticking. That means you're going to have more molecules at a given temperature in the vapor phase, which means the vapor pressure will be higher. So the one indirect variable with respect to IMFs is vapor pressure. If the IMFs are weak at a given temperature, the vapor pressure will be a high value. So the second part of the video, I just wanted to briefly talk about intra versus inter. So if you have like 2 molecules of neon and they're sticking to each other, that's inter, it's between molecules. In larger molecules, particular biological molecules, and this is specifically laid on the AP curriculum in chemistry, even though it's something that's extensively covered in AP biology, a lot of the intermolecular forces that we are going to talk about are considered also to be intramolecular when you're dealing with a large molecule containing thousands and thousands of atoms. For example, in proteins, there are 2 structures that are stabilized that are found in lots of proteins. One's called an alpha helix. I'll just circle it. This is an alpha helix. Another thing that's found in a lot of proteins is a beta pleated sheet. And basically, a protein is a long strand of amino acids, but the strand doesn't end up being straight. It folds in a certain way. And the folds of that single strand, which is a single large molecule, because all the amino acids are connected by covalent bonds, the actual 3-dimensional structure is often partially dependent upon intramolecular forces. So within the proteins, within both the alpha helix and the beta pleated sheet, there's a force called hydrogen bind. So hydrogen bind, which I'm going to talk about as an intermolecular force of attraction between water molecules, is also intra in large molecules. That intramolecular force of attraction, which is what stabilizes a structure called an alpha helix or a beta pleated sheet. It's also what stabilizes the helix in DNA. So the forces that we talk about as being between molecules in AP chemistry, mainly we're talking about smaller molecules. When a molecule is very large, like you have a long molecule, it's thousands of atoms long, all right, there can be a force of attraction between one part of the molecule here and another molecule right there, and that force between parts of the really large, long molecule is then going to be called an intramolecular force of attraction, and that might stabilize a connection. That's why proteins have these 3D shapes that are all relatively unique, because the way they end up folding really determines what they actually do. And the way they fold is in large part, not completely, but in large part due to intermolecular forces of attraction between different parts of the molecule. So the term intra would be between molecules. If you ever see a question about intra, that's dealing with force of attraction within a molecule stabilizing a particular 3D shape of a large molecule. And we're usually discussing this in the context of biology, proteins, nucleic acids, even lipids. We can talk about this as well. Thank you.